The 7800 XT, this one's from ASRock Phantom Gaming. So I wanted to give each one of these a look in their own right, in their own context, because the 7800 GPU should be the volume mover for AMD. I'll be surprised if this GPU doesn't do really well now and in the future as they ramp up volume and the market responds and so on and so forth. I really hope that this is a very successful card for AMD because this is a really nice card for gamers. I just hope they recognize it, they see it. Let's take a closer look at what we've got here from ASRock. If you didn't catch our day one launch review of the 7800 XT, you really should check that out because it covers the ins and outs of the 7800 XT. Bottom line, very, very good performance in the $500–600 price point as of 2023. In the landscape of GPUs, it's a tremendous value, especially if you're looking at a 4070 or even a 4080. It sort of slots in the middle of those two in terms of performance, but actually generally costs less than a 4070. And a very unusual move for NVIDIA. They just sort of quietly did price cuts, but not enough in my opinion, on the launch day for this thing. NVIDIA is the darling of Wall Street and for AI and everything else. But I think that means that gamers are going to get a little less attention because, well, let's face it, gamers are cost conscientious. If you're buying GPUs for AI, you're making money hand over fist with AI stuff. It doesn't matter that a GPU costs $30,000. I'm getting off track. Let's talk about gaming because this is the gaming answer, and I think it works really well. Intel is bringing up the rear, and they're almost there. They're almost a threat to AMD, so AMD should definitely be worried about Intel. But this is the GPU that's here today and stable and has a really good software stack and everything else. Definitely check out the day one review for things like HyperRX and frame generation and even ray tracing. We talk a little bit about ray tracing. Ray tracing is the weakest aspect of these cards, but if you want ray tracing, you're going to be buying the top tier card anyway, unless you're just doing ray tracing and it's like, oh, look at this old school Quake 3 arena from a decade ago. Look how amazing it looks in ray tracing. Guess what? That runs fine on this card too. All right, so let's take a physical look at the card. First up, it's got a built-in half a support bracket. Half a support bracket? Well, kinda, yeah. It wraps around the card and comes to here. So to this point, the card is supported. The PCB only continues to here, and then from here on down, the rest is heatsink. And you do have a little bit of pass-through cooling. It doesn't look like you have quite as much pass-through cooling because there's this metal plate in the way, but the gap here is actually pretty significant, so it's gonna let a fair bit of air flow through this. This is a 3-fan design, but this card is kinda tall. So if you have a case that is tall card challenged, like the Lee & 011 Dynamic, sometimes the wires bang up against the side of the glass, sometimes there's not quite enough of a, maybe the wires that have to go up and away. They did recess the power connectors. More of a recess might have been nice, but at least the power connectors will be here, so hopefully it'll clear the side of the case and work really well. It just depends on your build, depends on your case. This also can be a little bit of a challenge for small form factor builds. One of the things to look for small form factor builds is, do you have a 2-slot bracket? Even though this is a 3-slot card, make no mistake, it's 3 slots thick. A lot of the time, your cases will give you enough room for a 3-slot card, but you've only got 2 slots for a bracket. But this is a very long card as well, which can be a little bit of a challenge for desktop cases. Desktop cases, you may be able to have front-mounted fans, but not a combination front-mounted fan and radiator. It's going to depend on the thickness of your radiator, and you almost don't have a single millimeter to spare. This is also a real challenge to get to fit in our Cooler Master, my favorite, small form factor, easy build mode, small form factor Cooler Master case, the NR200. It fits, but you're gonna have to fiddle with it. You might have to unscrew some screws and take a bracket off, but you don't have a lot of room. It was really cutting it close. I almost don't recommend it, but it does actually work fine, especially if you get the NR200 that comes with the built-in GPU bracket. It's going to be a lot easier to install that way. And that officially does support 3-slot GPUs, but this is going to be better in terms of cooling and layout and bracket cover and everything else. This is a 5-ish heat pipe design. It's like 4 3/4 heat pipe. 4 3/4 heat pipe, what do you mean? Well, the main heat pipe that's in the middle only goes out the back of the card. The other two come from this end of the card, go wrap around, and then come back. So the heat pipe, the heat generation point is in the middle of the card here. The heat pipes go both ways. One goes this way, and the same heat pipe sort of comes around, wraps, and then does this. So the front part of your heatsink has 4 heat pipes in the fins, and the 5th heat pipe is on the cold plate on the bottom and shoots out the back, and that's the one in the middle over here. But the one in the middle over here doesn't go through the fins. I don't think it's necessary that it does that. In fact, I think this cooling is kind of maximum overkill. This is the best cooling setup that I've seen on a 7800 GPU to date. In terms of fit and finish, it's also got some transparent plastic and some purple accents. I was worried about the clear plastic here. It's like, do we need that? Does that impede airflow in any way? Turns out you can pop out a couple screws and take that off. Same with the accents on top. If you're a modder and you want to remove this clear plastic thing with the purple accents, it's just a couple of screws, pop it out, 3D print something. Nice. The card does have an LED on-off switch, so you can toggle the LEDs on and off. I would have preferred a BIOS switch, but hey, that's just me. There's also a dual 8-pin card. Dual 8-pin is great because if you're rocking a 700 watt power supply, this GPU is probably still going to be fine. Our board power on these is generally less than 300 watts, even when you do a maximum overclock. Out of the box, this is overclocked from ASRock, but it's a very, very mild overclock. This is also the best GPU that I got for out of the box overclocking, but it's a sample size of 1. I don't generally show my own manual overclocks in the review unless I really call it out and make it known like, hey, this is my experience. Your experience is probably going to be different. But between the GPU and the cooling and maybe this is like one of the best ones off the line, I don't know. Just enabling rage mode, just like one click in the AMD software, it makes a significant difference at higher resolutions, especially 4K. But let's take a look at the out-of-the-box overclock defaults and the performance. First up, Borderlands 3 4K preset. This is within margin of error. The reference card and the Phantom gaming card, basically the same performance. If we look at 1080p, okay, my 1% lows are a little low here. The deal with this is that I was encountering some anomalies with F1 2023, and so we messed with the system a lot, and it turns out that was an F1 2023 update that made some weird things happen when it rains, but that happens whether whatever kind of GPU you're running. So that's a problem with the game. And then once I did that, I created a weird problem for Borderlands 3. And I'm trying to get this completed in time, so there wasn't really enough time to revisit why Borderlands 3 specifically was doing this. But other games were fine. So generally, I think the performance is on par with the reference card. I don't think there's a lot of difference out of the box, is what this is showing. You maybe see it a little bit at 4K and 1440p, but it's within margin of error. Callisto Protocol is a game that I like to use to test the heat load generation of the GPU, and also because the 1% lows are generally all over the place. At 4K, we're within margin of error for stock 7800 XT or reference 7800 XT. We'll pull ahead a little bit when we're talking about 1080p and 1440p. It's kind of in the middle. Cyberpunk 2077 is always a fun one to look at. This is a 4K with the high preset, 79 versus 83. That's a decent uplift. Maybe it's borderline margin of error. 193 versus 194 at 1080. That's margin of error. 1440, 143 versus 144, margin of error. So it's looking like the out-of-the-box performance here is really not a lot different. Firestrike, 47 versus 49. Okay, now we can start to see performance delta that's maybe a little beyond margin of error. And this is probably down to memory clocks and memory performance. Shadow of the Tomb Raider, an older AAA title, 98 versus 99. Pretty much the same story, 245 versus 247. 181 versus 178, not a huge difference there. Time Spy, 18566 versus 18920. You can tell that ASRock has made some tweaks, but in terms of real-world gaming performance, there's really not a huge difference in performance. But what about temperature? Well, the hotspot temperature and the average temperature is best in class. That's what you're paying for. And this is probably also why this card overclocks better than any of them. I've got like 5 7800 XTs, and it's a really close race between the Sapphire 7800 XT Nitro and the ASRock Phantom Gaming 7800 XT, but the ASRock Phantom Gaming 7800 XT does overclock just a little bit better, which maybe is down to silicon lottery, but the cooler here is substantial. From 56 to 74 degrees, that's a 20 degrees C difference. Almost, 18. So yes, you can overclock it yourself. And if you overclock it yourself, the most benefit you see is in the 1% lows and at higher resolutions like 1440p and 4K. There are upscaling technologies coming. FSR3 is not out yet, and the full AMD software stack is really becoming world class. You should definitely check out my launch day review, because those are all extra features you get with any 7800 XT class GPU. If you're buying this GPU for like a 3, 4, 5 year solution, I really wouldn't do a significant overclock though. And again, I think that's where the AMD software shines. You can go in the AMD software and just let it tune your GPU. It may actually end up undervolting it or underclocking it, or you may be able to undervolt it or underclock it and achieve stability with the system. And then you've got better longevity, better cooling, and maybe even better performance. Just depends on silicon lottery. Overall, ASRock has put together a solid card with solid cooling. It's got pretty good backplate support, and it's decent. I would have liked to see a smaller option for smaller form factor builds. I would also like to see a BIOS switch, but overall, the performance here, the 7800 series, is like the every person GPU. I'm Wendell, this is Level 1, I'm signing out, and you can find me in the Level 1 forums. Oh, let's do a Linux build with it.